Hello, we are live. Welcome to Cinema Savvy and welcome to our roundup or countdown of our best and worst list of movies that came out in 2017. I'm Chris Garner, joined tonight with George Aldridge, Tayte and George. We're all back for 2018. We've taken a week off for Christmas, so hopefully everyone watching had a good Christmas. Happy holidays, whatever you celebrated over December, and Happy New Year to everyone. So we're not getting into 2018 movies just yet. This is going to be a recap, and this is going to be very interesting. I hope we all stay friends after the end of this one, because I think this might piss a few of us off to see what's on our list. So how are we doing tonight, gents?
I'm very well, thanks.
Good. Just the look of war on George's face right now. Like, he's ready for this.
I had such an intense New Year's Eve. Like, I went to bed at 11 o'clock and woke up at 10 a.m. the next day. It was just so intense. I don't think I could, ever repeat that process again.
Mm-hmm. And Tate, I think you hit it pretty hard last night, didn't you?
Of course I did.
Now, for everyone watching at home, I think we've got like a few seconds delay with Tate, so we're going to try our best to not constantly talk over each other. We're going to try and do our best with that. So I guess we'll begin in our list with the best. Are we going to end on the worst?
No, we'll do the worst first.
You want to do the worst first? Okay. So what essentially is going to happen is we've got our 5 picks for worst and indeed for best. Before we get to our number 1 pick for worst and best, we'll give a list of our honorable mentions of films that we wanted to include on the list, didn't have space for it, and we'll get through this as quick as possible. Everyone watching at home as well, get commented, let us know some of your favorites and also what you thought of the movies on our list as we go through them. So kicking off with the worst list, my number 5 pick is
Are we doing honorable mentions first? Are we doing them?
We have honorable mentions for worst films.
Yes. I've got honorable mentions for worst films. Yeah. So as I said, we'll do the first 4 picks in our list, then honorable mentions, then give the final one. My number 5 pick, I might have accidentally given it away right there, is Spider-Man: Homecoming. Now, all the Marvel fanboys can click off the video immediately. I hated this movie. We did a list of reviews of the Sam Raimi trilogy. We ignored The Amazing Spider-Man. And when it was confirmed that Marvel were getting Spider-Man back, I was kind of happy about that, because all the Marvel characters, well, especially now that they've bought out 20th Century Fox, have all been heading to Marvel. Finally, Marvel have the chance to do the character right again after Amazing Spider-Man. And what we got may, in fact, be on par with, if not worse than, the Amazing Spider-Man films in many ways. This wasn't a Spider-Man film. It was Iron Man 4. This was just a means to get him into Infinity War. You can't watch that film on its own. As a Spider-Man film, you cannot watch that as its own thing. It rests upon the shoulders of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe that has come before it. And they just took like a lot of cheap shortcuts with the character. It lacked any heart or emotion that any of the Sam Raimi films or even some of the Amazing Spider-Mans had. It was just an utterly dreadful experience of a movie-going experience. Didn't get Spider-Man back on the map for me. In fact, it was like a peg down. So hopefully Infinity War can do him justice. My number 5 pick is Spider-Man: Homecoming.
My number 5 is, it's not really a film I hate. I don't go to the cinema as much as these guys. I think I always have to say that. Over in England, every cinema except my local one basically has these cards where you get unlimited viewer, just evil bastard corporation, so I don't get that. So I do avoid a lot of the crap ones. However, I've got one film I like, which I'm just going to put down here because it wasn't really that good, but I liked it. And then I'm going to have 4 films I utterly detest. No, 3 I detest, another one that's just shit. But I'm going to go with Baywatch. I love The Rock. I thought this was actually quite funny. Wasn't the best made film in the world, but it's just not better than any of the ones I have ranked above it. It's definitely not the best film The Rock was in this year.
Yeah,
it did its job as a comedy. I thought it was funny.
It did. It's a very middle of the road film.
Yeah, it's cheap laughs, and I'd laughed. I thought it was funny. It has Alexandra Daddario and it has The Rock in it. It has other stuff, but then unfortunately it does have some very poor jokes. But yeah, that's my technical last one. But then we'll get to the other ones after.
Unfortunately, I've seen some bad films this year, and one of them being something which I was quite angry at the time, purely because it had so much potential and ended up being really shit, and that is The Snowman. The Snowman was the Michael Fassbender like thriller mystery murder thingy in set in Norway, and it had so much potential to be a way better film, but they went for the PG happy ending, even though most of the film was like a 15 to 18 kind of standard. They showed some parts of the trailer which never ended up in the film, especially parts involving a burning house and some characters who are probably going to be dead at the end of the story, but that never happened in the end. They went for the happy ending. The murder mystery gets solved and everyone lives and it's all happy, like they all sing Kumbaya at the end or some shit like that. It was really disappointing.
Maybe they should have sung that around the burning house. Maybe that would have been the missing footage at the end there.
So,
should also have opened with this
yeah.
as well in the intro. We haven't seen every single movie, obviously, from this year. There was a lot that I missed out this year for both my worst and best lists. So just to put that out there, in case you don't see a film on my list, it's probably because I haven't seen it. And I haven't seen Baywatch or The Snowman, actually. They were on my list to get watched, but didn't get it done in time. My number 4 pick for worst is Guy Ritchie's cinematic opus that was King Arthur, Legend of the Sword.
Stop, Chris. Stop talking, because I'm going to be talking about that
I could talk a little bit about it. We can let you talk about it as well. A film that I forgot I even went to see until I was going back through all the list of films that I went to see this year. The reason that this doesn't feature horror on my list, even though this film was utter dross from beginning to end, is because it was entertaining bad. I saw this with one of my colleagues from my old workplace, and we were just laughing beginning to end at the travesty that was unfolding before us. This is now 2 bad King Arthur movies we've had in a row, and God help us when we get to Guy Ritchie's live-action Aladdin movie in a year's time. Is it? Is it this year? Is it next year?
Starring Will Smith as the genie.
As the genie, absolutely. This movie had Littlefinger in it. It had CGI elephants in an opening battle scene. It had a guy that looked like a villain, Jude Law as a villain that looked like a Mortal Kombat character, and a character that just couldn't keep still for 1 second. This movie was terrible. But if you're looking for a potential drunken movie watch-along, I would probably recommend King Arthur, Legend of the Sword as one of those. Number 4 pick, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword.
My number 4 pick is none other than Transformers. Is it 5 or 6?
5.
Transformers 5.
A movie that will be appearing on my list later on, by the way.
That's fine. It just wasn't very good. Like is it watchable? I don't really know, because I mean this is the
George. Chris called me afterwards, almost in tears, on how bad it was.
Yeah, I know, but he likes the animated one, which is crap as well. But the problem with this was that I swear it was like 3.5 hours long. I just remember it just being long, and submarines and Mark Wahlberg and explosions and actually like a butler and not Alfred Hopkins, Anthony Hopkins. Transformers. I mean, it's not the worst Transformers film. That still goes to Transformers 4, but this is definitely the longest Transformers film, which is just something I can't do. I could probably watch Transformers 1 and 3 in the time it takes to sit through this. I don't think I'll ever be able to sit through this. It's going to be at a cinema. You can't pause it and go to the room for food. But like this was just long. And the IMAX 3D broke, so it was actually a waste of actually going to the IMAX.
You got free tickets out of it, didn't you?
I got free tickets, yeah, but come on. Like, they could have given me free tickets for a future film because, like, well, I can't really say Spider-Man came out the following week, but Planet of the Apes did.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Transformers. It's not as good as Fantastic, is it? It's Transformers. Don't know how they're going to call it.
They'll find a way. Get to the next one. Go on, Tay. What's your number 4?
My number 4 is Justice League, and the reason behind Justice League being here is mainly because of Henry Cavill's mustache.
You mean John Travolta?
It's so weirdly obvious. It just completely distracts you. But not only that, but it's a massive CGI fest. 2 of the characters you really don't care about because they're so bland and boring. One of the characters is just a walking joke. Like, the only reason why they're in the film is, haha, let's just laugh along with him or laugh at him throughout the entire thing, that being the Flash. Terrible, terrible casting. As like really, really bad. It just ended up being a trash film, and it tried so hard to be the Avengers and fell so far from the Avengers. it's them trying to jump the gun. They should have taken more time with it. Instead, they wanted to rush it out as soon as possible, and I feel like it would have been a lot better if they'd given it another like 2 years before they put out their mega film.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say that I haven't seen it yet, but I'm pretty like a billion percent confirmed it would be on this list. Just because we haven't done the news for a while, I've been waiting to say this for so long. It's now made and it's out of cinemas officially less money than Man of Steel.
Wow.
So it's doing worse than a film 4 years earlier, and it's the fourth or the fifth? It's the fifth DC film. So yeah, 668 mil. Also more than half less the first Avengers film made.
When you told me that, I was amazed that it was even still in cinemas.
They had like one showing a day, and then they just took all 1,600 out, and now Jumanji and The Last Jedi fighting each other.
Yeah. I will say, I guess it's kind of a spoiler for my list. Justice League actually isn't in it. It's in my honorable mentions list for worst. But to me, it was a movie that was just dead on arrival, and I didn't get too worked up about it or anything like that. My number 3 pick is a Stephen King adaptation, but not the one you're probably familiar with. This is The Dark Tower, starring Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey. Once again, another movie I'd completely forgotten that I went to see this year. And I ranked this above King Arthur because King Arthur is probably technically a worse movie, but I found it enjoyably funny. This was just a chore to sit through. I haven't read the books, but this took like a famous saga of books that is beloved, that has a lot of lore involved. It goes really, really in depth. And I think they pretty much condensed everything into a palatable 1.5 to 2 hour movie, rushed through a lot of the stuff. There was no development, no stakes, nothing like that, but a marginally enjoyable performance from McConaughey. This film just had nothing. None of the action hit, none of the atmosphere, none of the world building. It was a film that was just an absolutely vacant experience. And to the point where I was watching it with one of my mates who said, Hitman's Bodyguard's playing in the next cinema. Should we just go and watch that now? I've never walked out of a film, and I didn't walk out of this one. But by God, I came close to it. So number 3 pick is The Dark Tower. I don't even have any more to say about it.
My 3rd pick is also a Stephen King adaptation, but it is the one you're thinking of. It's It. I think it says a lot about the film, and the best part of it was scaring Tate in the real life.
Yeah, but here's the thing, George. Like, it was only scaring because you guys were literally jogging my arm every 5 minutes. The film itself was laughable.
I will say
the film itself was laughable.
This is my issue, that I do not like horror films because they don't scare me, and to me that fails as a horror film. Like, if a comedy to make you laugh, to me that's a terrible comedy.
Yeah,
that a terrible comedy would be towards the bottom of this list. Maybe there is one.
It was one of the best comedies of this year, right?
It's so bad it's funny, really. Like,
it might be on your worst, but in terms of cinematic like experiences, it was probably one of the most enjoyable I've had from last year.
Probably as well.
But that's only because us 3 were together.
Well, yeah.
But I've got, this film is nothing to me, and what's worse is the hype that came out from it. I just didn't enjoy this. I just was bored. There was nothing happening that I didn't. I mean, yes, it's a book. I haven't read the book, but no one's going to sit there and say, I'm going to tell you everything happens, because you know what's going to happen next. Mm-hmm. It's part 1 of a series for a start, so you know there's going to have to be a second one, precisely. So I had nothing towards this. I just didn't. Yes, it was funny. Yes, it's a meme, but I don't know. This is just irrelevant to me. I don't think I'll ever see it again. I don't care for it. I'm sick and fed up of seeing people being scared of clowns. It's just boring. And moving on. Goodbye. It.
My number 3 is, don't even know how to describe it. It isn't even an Alien film at this point. It's Alien Covenant, basically Prometheus 2. I can't understand how Ridley Scott can go one good film to one bad film to one good film to one bad film. And now he's had 2 massive, and these are massive strikes in the Alien franchise. This film was boring. I usually kind of like don't want to leave a cinema, even if I need to like piss or something like that. I was happy enough to walk out of this cinema and go for a very quick piss, and then come back in my leisurely time. Like, it's not walking out of the film, but it may as well have been. This film was insulting to the franchise itself. It doesn't even compare to Alien 4, which is horrific.
Up until that point was probably the worst, or Alien versus Predator, if you count those.
Alien versus Predator 1 has at least some fun entertainment. Alien versus Predator 2 is just plain bad. This is worse than that. because it tries and it still is really bad.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that you can commend from this film is Michael Fassbender playing Michael Fassbender's flute, which is not a euphemism. It genuinely happens. And yeah, that's the only thing you can really take from the film.
Yeah, I agree. Covenant's on my honorable mentions again for
I
worst.
actually
Yeah, you
haven't seen it.
Mm.
It was on my list. I have a list of films that I wanted to watch that they're either going to be near the top and be decent, or they were going to be near the bottom and be abysmal. And I did have a copy of this lying around. The question isn't whether I paid for it. The question is I finished downloading it. And I just put it on pause because I had better things to do, like do anything else. But Ridley Scott, though, like, he has given us some really funny news bites.
Oh, it's this
he's
part of
also
the news I always look
talked
forward to.
He says he'll never work on Star Wars because he's, quote, too dangerous. And he was slagging off all the indie directors, but ironic when an indie director's Alien 4 pitches better than his.
God, yeah. I do love Ridley Scott, though. Like, if not for his movies, just for his interview skills. My number 2 pick is The Mummy, a film that set out to create an entire new cinematic universe, the Dark Universe, as it was titled, and will probably now be limited to that one movie. It was a massive waste of potential, opportunity. Like arguably the original cinematic universe of Universal Monsters could easily have been adapted for a modern audience. They could have gone for like hard-hitting horror films. Really got creative with it, and this movie had nothing. However, the one thing that it did give us was a great impression by George of Russell Crowe's character as Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, which I don't know if I want to put you on the spot to do that impression. I'll let you do that in your own time.
Maybe someone else will talk about Mummy in a bit.
Yeah. This film, like, you knew exactly what kind of movie it was going to be from the trailer. They completely missed the mark of the tone. They banked everything on this movie. Very similar to Spider-Man Homecoming. It didn't feel like an individual film. It didn't feel like a Mummy film. It didn't feel like a Dr. Jekyll film. It felt like a hodgepodge of everything they wanted to do to set up for however many films down the franchise, and they forgot to focus on the movie itself. Tom Cruise tries to turn in a good performance as the lead, and I always liked Tom Cruise anyway, but even he was sleepwalking through this one. The Mummy is my number 2 pick.
My number 2 pick is Spider-Man Homecoming. The most depressing cinematic experience of my life. I literally sat there confused as to how people are laughing. Why do people enjoy this? Why is this a thing? Even more depressing that we'll never see the Sam Raimi Spider-Man again. Spider-Man for a long time was my favorite comic book character as a kid growing up. Once until I obviously started knowing more about Batman and stuff. And I was down for the reboot. I really liked him in Civil War. I was looking forward to this, and I will say this: that Michael Keaton is the saving grace of this film.
I forgot to mention him when I made the list. Like, he was the best thing in it.
He's the only good thing in this film. And going to the cinema, I wasn't liking the trailers at all when they spoiled the entire film. I got a gist that okay, this film, the entirety of this film is going to be how do I impress Iron Man because I need to be in the Avengers film, which I'm contracted for anyway. So already it's a loss. And then just watching it, it's not my Spider-Man, and it's not even an arrogant like sort of jealousy that this isn't the way I wanted it to be. This is literally, you've got a clean slate to do with the Spider-Man character. You have so much potential, and you spend 2 hours of just why can't I be your sidekick, Iron Man? Let me in the Avengers. When you know someone's already in it for Civil War, don't create a film around him trying to be in it. You do that before Civil War if you're going to do it, if that makes sense and stuff. I was just so bored, disappointed. This could have been something, but I felt nothing, and I don't know. It's an absolute disgrace, the Spider-Man character. There's so much potential. I mean, I liked the little Avengers tidbits that they used the guns to get the tech. That's the kind of connection I didn't mind. When the entire plot point of the first potentially decent Spider-Man film in 10 years is I have to impress Iron Man for a film everyone knows I'm going to be in, that really stung, and I felt nothing because you knew the end game from the very get-go, and the only twist in it is I guess that Aunt May finds out, which is the final scene, which they probably won't mention in Infinity War. You have to wait for Spider-Man Homecoming 2 for that. But I just felt nothing, and the jokes didn't land. Michael Keaton's the saving grace. He dropped out of Kong to do this. Don't know if that was a good idea, but I did like him as the Vulture, and it did have that very good scene in the car. But this is just nothing. This was just a film that had to be made to get Saying that paycheck to let him be in a couple more films.
Mm.
My number 2 pick is The Mummy. The easiest way of putting this is that The Mummy was one of the most boring films I've ever seen. It is ridiculous. I don't get it. It felt like it was 4 hours long, which is completely baffling. I can't even think of any saving grace from this film, really. Tom Cruise phones in his performance. It isn't a good Tom Cruise performance. It is a very bland Tom Cruise performance. And apparently he got given creative control over the film, or a little bit more than normal. And it just didn't feel like a cohesive film. It just felt like Tom Cruise running away from things, the movie. And no one wants to see that. So yeah, Mummy, number 2.
Right, so I guess I'll go into honorable mentions. Are we all doing honorable mentions? And
I don't have any.
Or... Okay.
I have 2.
Do you want to give your 2 then now, Tate, and then I'll give my list as well?
So my first honorable mention is Cars 3, one of the worst Pixar films to date. And my other one, even though I haven't seen it, is the Emoji Movie, because it would obviously be number 1 if we had seen it.
Now, Tate, that's unprofessional as a movie critic. You have to see a movie before you can pass judgment. It's fair enough. My ones were Thor Ragnarok. I had Justice League on there, Alien Covenant, and The Great Wall, which was that whitewashed Matt Damon movie with Pedro Pascal from February of last year. My number 1 pick, unsurprising to everyone, is Transformers: The Last Knight, a movie, as Tate put it earlier, I pretty much had a mental breakdown on the phone to him after it had finished. It was a movie that was agonizingly long. I did a 12-hour Lord of the Rings marathon, and that felt shorter than watching The Last Knight. I was on my phone all the way through Transformers. I felt like I needed someone there to talk to maintain my sanity through the absolute travesty that I was watching. It's an utter train wreck of a movie. It's 3 hours long, and if you asked me now what the plot was and what it was about, I wouldn't be able to tell you. It's a whole movie of nothing. It doesn't advance the Transformers story in any way. It convolutes it even more. It sets up for a Transformers 6. God forbid that actually ever happens. And the goddamn picture ratio all the way through the movie, just absolutely dreadful. Transformers are hateful. The racial stereotypes are back again. The annoying female lead, the terrible comic relief, and even the action can't save this one. It's a movie that they've basically repeated the plot for 5 times over now, and I think even the audiences have got used to that. It's pretty stale at this point. But, you know, they've still got all those other Transformers movies that they're going to bring out, but I just couldn't wait to leave this one. Usually every year on this channel, we each have a get-out-of-jail-free card for a movie that we really, really don't want to see above all else. But I had to be a trooper and go and see it. I've watched the other 4, and I had to go and see this one. And I really wish I'd have got out of jail free on this movie. Number 1, Transformers: The Last Knight, and it's going to take a big movie from this year to top that as my worst in a long time.
My worst film of 2017 is The Mummy. Oh dear. I love Tom Cruise. I like the classic Mummy film. Well, I can't even call them classic, can I? They're from the 90s. The Mummy trilogy, the Brendan Fraser ones. And when they said they were doing a Mummy in modern day, I was like, okay, they can give it a go. And I just remember that first trailer come out, and it was like, oh, wow, CGI Mummy wiping out London. I think we know what's going to go on from here on. And then here comes the announcement, Cinematic Universe, and then they cast the entire universe. The first film's not out yet. And I sat there at the cinema, and I won't lie, before the reviews, everything, I was kind of half, not excited, but intrigued, because I wanted this film to be a hit, because it would be cool to see the classic sort of monsters on screen and stuff. And when it started, it took like 2 minutes to get into it of what I know I'm in here for. This is easily not one of Tom Cruise's best films. It has the worst character in Peaky Blinders as a lead role, which was heartbreaking because she is a truly terrible actress. I don't even know her name. One of her Peaky Blinders is Grease. That's how they do it. Yes, we had Russell Crowe and he was great for the impressions and the other stuff. But I was just so bored, and it was just crap. I don't know what else there is to say about it. Like, it was just abysmal.
George, you have to do it. You have to do the impression.
Well, considering, well, I mean, he does say, "Welcome to a new world of gods and monsters," but we're not getting a new world because it's been shut down forever. We're not going to get it. The closest thing we're getting to a what's that one in the ocean? That sea monster in the ocean thing.
Creature from the.
That's the one.
Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Right. So what I've heard, this Guillermo del Toro film has just come out.
Oh, Shape of Water.
Yes, apparently that was originally pitched as a Black Lagoon thing film, and they told him F off. We've got this monster universe planned. So he basically did George Lucas, but I made it as something else. Similar as how Lucas wanted Flash Gordon, ended up doing Star Wars.
Yeah.
Obviously, Del Toro's come out the best off for a very rare time. Normally, it's the way around. But the Mummy films is just shite. Tom Cruise, come on, man, you got yourself injured on the set of Mission Impossible. From what I heard, he failed the take 4 times, and they said, "Can we use a stuntman?" He said, "No, I'll do it." Injured himself on the 5th. But yeah, The Mummy, definitely not a film I will ever be buying, watching again, and actually will have no relevance to the future. But like, I did like Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
Only for like 2 lines. And I swear there was another terrible actor in there. There's some like dead person as a friend or something.
My number one film pick for the worst of the year is the PlayStation 2 graphics involved that went into King Arthur, The Legend of the Sword. The fact that the final boss fight for this film was literally a Mortal Kombat fight.
It was literally a final boss fight.
Not only that, but the entire film felt like a cutscene. Like, it kept on doing that one shot where it zooms out and then zooms in really, really kind of close, but it's still quite distant. And it was doing those on this weird fight scenes. Like, terrible acting, terrible directing, terrible editing. I don't expect this from Guy Ritchie. I really don't. And it completely disappointed me. I went in with absolutely 0 expectations and came out with less. So,
brilliant. So is that it? Right. Okay. I guess that concludes our worst of list, and we'll move.
It's so depressing. Like, everyone's on such a downer when we get to the terrible films.
I will say, like, in terms of the terrible films, though, it's probably better than last year's. Because I remember, was it last year or 2015 being a really bad year?
2016 was awful.
Last year. Last year was pretty bad.
But yeah, I guess we don't have any closing thoughts on the worst. They are what they are. That's our list there. So we'll move on to the best. So are we going to change up the order on this one of who's going first? And
no idea.
Yeah.
I'll go last.
Okay. I'll go first then. So Tate, you if you want. Yeah. Number 5 pick for me for best of 2017 is Mother, directed by Darren Aronofsky with Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem. This is probably for me one of the most underrated movies from this year. But, and we stress this in our review, I can absolutely understand why people wouldn't like this film. I think in terms of the marketing, that's where this movie fell short, is that it was marketed as an all-out, just regular horror movie. But it was so much more than that. And it's a movie that I'm not going to give away what it is at the end. But it's a movie that you could quite easily write a dissertation on. You could talk and discuss for about 4 hours. We could have gone much longer, and ours was like a near 2-hour review. Great performances all around, really unsettling, moody tone to it. I don't even know if I'd call it a horror film. It has horror elements to it, I guess. Very much of a thriller, but once you get to the end, you're either going to love this movie or you're going to hate it. It's a very Marmite movie in that regard. And I loved it. A lot of people walked out and were tutting and shaking their heads like, what did we just watch for the last 2 hours? In that final scene, it all clicked for me, and I saw the true genius behind the movie. And it was a lot better than Noah, which was Aronofsky's previous movie. So absolute return to form for him. And a movie I've only seen once, so that's why it's not higher on my list. But it's a movie that I was absolutely enraptured by, trying to guess how it was going to unfold all the way through. And a film that has a big purpose in life.
Yes.
And that's all I'm going to leave it at that. So number 5 pick was Mother, exclamation point.
I found this almost impossible to do my top 5 list, to the point where my honorable mentions, my short list was about 13 films, which made it really difficult to get it down to 5. Um, if I could do a tie, I really would. But only just edging it out. Baby Driver at number 5. This film was just beautifully edited. I could say it's probably the complete opposite of King Arthur. It was well edited, well acted, and just completely well done. The choreography in this film, to go along with the music, is just sublime. It's really, really good. I've got it on DVD out with me here in Austria, so I'm just, really happy to go and watch it again. So yeah, just a really, really good film.
I love Baby Driver. My 5th pick isn't Baby Driver though. My 5th pick is the Catherine Bigelow Under the Radar, randomly released Detroit. Based on the Detroit riots. This film was incredibly gripping, I want to say. This had one of the tensest, I guess you could say, middle thirds I've ever seen to a film. Like, it builds up, it goes into it. For those that don't know, it's about the Detroit riots in the late 60s. I mean, I guess you want to know the history. That I'm not going to go into that thing because I don't want to get any dates and stuff wrong because I like my history stuff. But it's based off a true life story, and it goes into details on the night of a multiple murder by a policeman, drive-through motel. And it kept me on the edge of my seat. It made me disgusted once more with all white people, including myself. Just that kind of feeling you get coming out of a film like this. And I just remember being on edge. I liked the build-up, getting into it, introducing multiple characters, and then going into it, having you on the edge of your seat because you know people died, but you didn't know which ones were going to die. So it's all about that build-up. You had amazing performances. Actually, probably one of the best ones I've seen this year, Will Poulter as the cop. Terrifying. He's come a long way since the School of Comedy on E4, but that was one of the performances. And I just remember loving that film in the sense that this was a very good film that not enough people have seen because they released an Oscar bait film in the it was August when it was it July or August? It was July when no, it was August. They released an Oscar film in August, which was completely overshadowed by every blockbuster that came out around that time. And I don't know if this is going to be up for awards, but that film has not left my memory. And it's a sort of film that a lot of people, I think, would need to see and would probably not necessarily enjoy it, but appreciate it for what it is. But this is in my top 5. I will say before, I should have said this before I said number 5, this year has been incredible. Last year was, well, technically 2016 was so terrible that I hardly went to the cinema at all that year. I was basically non-vacant, but this year's had some truly incredible films, and there's a lot more I need to see.
Yeah.
But definitely already this is one of the strongest years I've probably had in a long time.
My number 4 pick, and I really, really hope I'm not going to deeply offend George with this one, is Dunkirk, and I'm sure he's going to talk much more about that later on in his list. The reason that I've put it at number 4 is that I've watched it multiple times. It's a phenomenal movie, but I now see it as just a broad spectacle in terms of like editing and what he went through to get that made and all the practical effects, everything like that. And for that, it's great. I see it in sort of this might offend a lot of people, similar vein to like Mad Max Fury Road, where you watch it and you're just strapped in for like the length of time, and it's just like an absolute roller coaster of a movie. And Dunkirk was absolutely that. This was the movie that I kind of saw on IMAX for the first time. I'm going to chalk my first ever IMAX experience up to Star Wars The Last Jedi. This was kind of a teaser for that. But I mean, it's Christopher Nolan on absolute fine form. I don't know if I'd have it in like my top 3 favorites of his movie, but the guy's made so many phenomenal movies. I mean, George has seen all the behind the scenes, and he was telling me some about that, and he's will talk much more about that later. But it just sounds like this was an absolute. It's a film that you just watch and think like, how can someone make that? How can one guy, one visionary, one director actually do that? And all the things he did to accomplish it. Great casting. It's a movie that doesn't really dwell on character, and I think that's why I've ranked it down. Not that that's a detriment to the movie, because you kind of just see them all getting home, and that's as much motivation as they need. They didn't need to dwell on character, but that's why I've ranked some movies above it, because I had more of an emotional connection to it, because you do get to know the characters a bit more. But in terms of the editing, the timing, the shuffling around, there's going to be a great fan edit one day of this movie where they play it all in sequential order. But Dunkirk, if you haven't seen it, go and see it. It's an absolute great experience. But it's one, however, I would only recommend probably if you've got the biggest TV available and the best sound system available. Buy it on 4K as well. I hear it's great on 4K too.
My number 4. We thought we were done with comic book films. I said last year that comic book films are probably going to be dying out pretty soon. Was I wrong? There was 2 that really stood out this year. One which just missed off the list, and probably will go down onto my honorable mentions, or maybe slightly off that. The other one was taking the Old West, combining it with the superhero genre, and giving us probably one of the best superhero films of all time in the shape of Logan. Now, this, I didn't get to see it when it first came out. I had to wait until I had to go back to Britain, and this film just, it's something that you can just watch at any point. It's a tough one to get through, knowing that it's Hugh Jackman's last performance as Wolverine, and seeing all these beloved characters from the previous films. You only get to see maybe like 1 or 2, and just overall, I was totally immersed in the story. I was totally impressed by it, and I don't know if anything that Marvel's going to do is ever going to match that. I genuinely don't. I think that whatever like Fox did for that film, I don't think that the Marvel machine could match that in its current state. I don't think that DC could match that in its current state. They went and took something, a simple concept. It's Old Man Logan. It's the comic they're going to base it off, and they turned it into something which we can look back on, I reckon, in a few years' time and say, wow, that film still holds up.
It was a modern day Western in many ways, really.
It was. It was beautiful. It was amazing.
It was phenomenal. And it was heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately didn't feature on my list, but it is an honorable mention.
No, same here, I was about to say.
Yes.
Fourth up on my list is War for the Planet of the Apes, a film which I actually thought would be a lot higher, but it wasn't. I've had truly a lot of thought about this film, and this is how good this year's been. This is fourth. This is a film I've seen 3 times, heard Michael Giacchino play a suite live and reduce me to tears, and it's fourth. That's what shocked me most. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil it for those who haven't seen it. It's the final Apes prequel film. I definitely hope now that Disney have bought it, please leave it untouched. I know you're good at it's Andy Serkis, but please leave this trilogy untouched. But my word, this is easily capped off, to me, sorry, Lord of the Rings, one of the greatest trilogies of this century thus far. I'm not going to go into specific trilogies because there's another one that's still number 1. But I still sit here today stunned that a 3-film, well, this film specifically, about a man in tight spandex with bulbs and a headlamp on, gives, again, one of the finest performances in a long time. Andy Serkis can truly do no wrongs. Even when he's trolling everybody as Snoke, he can do no wrongs. This film brought in the emotion. I mean, Rise was a fantastic character piece of this ape growing up and, you know, the human interactions with it. Dawn was the Dawn of the Apes. It was the one that's going to kickstart that drama. You had the villain with Cobra. And War was the emotional character, the final character piece one of Caesar, which caps off the trilogy. And not only as a prequel does it complete its purpose of putting everything in place for the final films, but this does it in such an amazing way that's heartbreaking. I mean, the music is on point. Obviously, the CGI is stunning to this day. The performances are great. They had a young kid actor in that didn't do my head in. Normally, kid actors are something that a lot of people can get. I mean, like Mad Max 3. You chuck too many in there, people get like a bit too funny about it, and it can be annoying. But Nova was great and leads to sort of a human point that won't be talking in the future. But I don't know how to talk about this film without like spoiling it. It was, I'm gonna spoil it then. It was honestly, and I think Chris has got stuff to say, so I hope he can do a better job of summarizing it than I do. But this film is truly spectacular and heartbreaking, and everything I wanted. It was better than what I thought it could be. And the fact that Matt Reeves is now going to get a Batman trilogy, part of me is disappointed he's getting Batman, because I think he can do so much more than a character we've seen over a dozen times on big screen in the last few years. I'd love to see him do some new stuff, but this means we could possibly get Michael Giacchino in a Batman film, some of the amazing cinematography, if you get the character story that he tells via characters on a Batman film, he's got a chance of making a Batman film as good as Nolan. But War for the Planet of the Apes, it says what it is. It's a war film, but it was amazing. While we wait for Chris to come back, I will have to. Tate has one thing I'm sure he has to say about this film.
Avalanches. That's not how they work.
Yes. Like what John Boyega says in Star Wars, even though it's a film about CGI monkeys. But yes. Not my number 4 pick. War for the Planet of the Apes.
Sorry, guys, I'm dog sitting for someone. I just had to let the dog in who was crying outside. I'll be talking about that movie in a short while, but my next movie is a movie that's already been talked about. Well, actually, it's Tate's pick, isn't it? Is it Tate's pick next?
No, it's Chris.
No, it's back to me, that's right. Number 3 is Detroit. George pretty much said everything. This is, without a question of a doubt, one of the most hardest hitting movies from this year. It was a movie that finished. I sat through the entirety of the credits, and it sounds so pretentious to say, but like for the rest of the day, it was like playing on my mind. I had absolute white guilt. I'm not gonna lie, like the entire week after I saw that movie. But my God, what was his name? Will Poulter. If he's not nominated for Best Supporting Actor at this year's Oscars, it's an absolute travesty and will be easily the biggest snub from this year. It's one of the most intensest performances I've ever seen, and has now achieved the top 3 picks of my most hated characters in movie history. You've got Percy from The Green Mile, you've got Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and now you've got Will Poulter from this movie, a movie that he dropped out of It to be in. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I would have loved to have seen Will Poulter as Pennywise, and even when you do see Pennywise now, you can kind of see what he would have brought to that role and what he would have looked like in that makeup. But absolutely the right decision. The entire scene in the Algiers motel is like, you are there for like a good half hour, and it is terrifying. And it's the way that Catherine Bigelow films it as well is so just real, and all the stuff before it as well. Like, it feels like a war movie, like when you're seeing all the rioting in the streets and the chaos that ensued from it. It's a long movie. It's a long sit. It's getting up there to 3 hours. But I watched it again recently, and it still carries every bit of impact as the first time I watched it. And that's why I ranked it slightly higher than Dunkirk, is that Dunkirk was great, loved it for its action and everything like that. But Detroit left more of an impact on me. Great performance as well. And Gilly from Game of Thrones was in it as well. As a fun little nod. That's my number 3 pick.
My number 3 pick is Mother. All I want to do is bring life into this list.
Damn it, I forgot to bring up that meme. Thank you.
This was the first horror film to truly horrify me. It isn't a film filled with jump scares. It's a film that is filled with actual psychological horror, and I respect it for that. It takes a story which is well known by everyone and basically flips it on its head, and it basically tells it how it is, and I hope it changes horror. I hope it gets more filmmakers making psychological horror films instead of the jump scare happy It from this year. Like, this film left me literally writing down all my notes from it, trying to piece together all the pieces, and it takes a really good film to do that. Chris, you agreed with me in saying like you really, really kind of had to take time to wrap your head around the film. Like, you had to almost stew in it and kind of process it. And to this day, one of my friends who I went to go see the film with, he's still trying to get his head around it. And the film came out like almost 3 months ago.
It was a week after It, wasn't it? It was like 2 sort of very different horror films back to back. Yeah. So
yeah, Mother at number 3.
My number 3 film is Blade Runner 2049. I'm hoping one of you guys has something else to say about this film. Maybe not. Good. There have been 2 films this year, there's been many irrelevant films made this year, as there is every year, pathetic reboots, sequels, and whatnot. Nobody wanted a Blade Runner film 3-4 years ago, but we got one, and then they started bringing back the cast, bringing in a fantastic director in Denis Villeneuve. Not Villeneuve, sorry, that's Spanish, not French. Anyway,
I'm so used to saying that as well.
I know
I blame Pirates of the Caribbean.
It's just when you know Spanish more than you know French. But Blade Runner 2049 did something. It made me invested in a film that I didn't think I would be in. It was a slow burner which built up the entire film. Seeing the same universe 30 years later in the film, seeing what's happened, what's changed. They don't take you for a fool when you enter the film. They take you in knowing the previous version of the film, knowing that this isn't a happy-go explosion film to bring your 10-year-old kids to. This is, if you know the first one, this is for you to sit down and think about. You can be treated as a half-intelligent person to follow this film. And I genuinely thought it was outstanding, whether this was visual effects, plot points. I very loved Ryan Gosling's performance, even though he was technically literally soulless. It was definitely my favorite performance of his recently. Harrison Ford was great again, used sparingly. And Jared the Meme Leto continues to meme himself to the max. I don't know. I still have to talk about it. You had a Hans Zimmer come on the very last minute and compose, I think, a great soundtrack that matched, well, not matched, but you can tell it's the Blade Runner soundtrack
Same
and it works
vein,
for.
yeah.
Yeah, same vein there. There you go. But I thought this film was outstanding. In all honesty, I didn't think it would do. I wasn't sold by those trailers. I was actually very disappointed. Looking back on the film, but I think we also listened in the review that the trailers were horrible because they marketed an action frenzy film, which this was not. Arguably, in them trailers, they probably showed the 3 action scenes that are in the film.
You can understand why they did that, though, didn't they? Because I guess Blade Runner is quite a very difficult film to market to mass audience.
Maybe, but if they'd have just done some other more interesting things, I like that first teaser bringing sort of Harrison Ford back into it. They could have done so much more, but just have cars exploding stuff in the trailer. It didn't sell it. It did something like Her, where you actually can believe a relationship between an app and the human being, basically. I think this is a worthy sequel to the original Blade Runner. That time will only improve this further. It wasn't the juggernaut box office hit we thought it could be. I mean, no one thought it was going to be a juggernaut, but no one anticipates making it as it did. It's a slow burner, but when you get into it, it hits you. It hits you hard. And I had a thoroughly good time enjoying this, and I cannot wait to see it a second time.
And with how many cuts we got the original Blade Runner, maybe we'll get that 4-hour rumored cut that was made and then cut down for theatrical release.
I really hope I don't think we will, because he doesn't like his deleted scenes. He's a bit like a Nolan.
Yeah.
But I would really enjoy it if they wanted to put another 40 minutes to an hour on, because if they've got the footage for a 4-hour, then just go for it. And in a film like this, where it's already a slow burner, nothing wrong with doing an intermission. I mean, you've got to do it in Lord of the Rings and people like that.
Right, so going on to my number 2. Again, a film that's already been mentioned, War for the Planet of the Apes, and I really don't know what more I can say from what George said about it. Matt Reeves, absolute fine form, who I won't even say saved the franchise because I really liked Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but it is unquestionably one of the best trilogies that's come out in the last 10 years. And its strength is that the trailers made, again, look like an all-out action movie, and the title, like War for the Planet of the Apes, that's what you expect. But this shows the other side of war. This shows, like, it's essentially, I think I mentioned it was like Planet of the Apes meets Schindler's List when it came out. And it absolutely is. I have never been so invested in characters. We've followed these characters. It feels like an actual family, they've gone through generations and everything like that. We've got Woody Harrelson in the movie, who's a fantastic villain in there. And it was just a real, bleak and grim tone. And for Planet of the Apes, which is quite an out there concept in and of itself, to get that level of gravity behind it and character and emotion, it just stands testament to Matt Reeves' directing. You're absolutely right. I cannot wait for his Batman trilogy. I think that's still happening. I hope it's still happening, because I really want to see what he'd do with the Batman character, especially if he gets Gyllenhaal on board to play Batman in that role. Andy Serkis, one of his best performances of his entire career, probably say his second best. I mean, he's great when he's actually himself on the camera, but he is sort of the motion capture guy now, and that brings me on to the special effects for this film. You don't see special effects. You really don't. You see actual characters there. You know that the apes technically aren't there, but the special effects have come, so even since the first Apes film, they've come so far at this point that they look almost photorealistic when they're on camera, especially in some of the close-ups with Maurice's character, the orangutan, everything that went along with it. And I'm not going to give away the ending, but it does get very emotional towards the end, and it felt like a fitting end to the trilogy. Now that Disney technically own it through 20th Century Fox. Maybe we'll get like a whole nother trilogy based on like, you know, in so many years' time with Caesar's descendants. I really hope we don't, though. If this is all we get, I'm happy with that. They revitalized the franchise. It's one of the best remakes or readaptations, whatever you want to say. And this movie, I don't even know if it'd be the best. I like elements of all three, but it definitely ends on a very conclusive note. And that's why it's my number 2 pick, Wolf Planet of the Apes.
My number 2 pick is Blade Runner 2049. This was a really difficult choice between this and my number 1 pick. All I can say about this film is that it took some elements I didn't like in the original Blade Runner and improved upon them. There were some elements where the original Blade Runner, I feel like it wasn't really unnecessary, but some of the dialogue was slightly off and some of the scenes felt a little bit uneasy. This film took that and kind of just made it a bit more compelling. The one thing that brings this film down is the music, I have to say. If it had more time and had just more worked on it by Hans Zimmer, this film could have been one of the best of probably all time, I'd say. It's truly amazing for a film that really shouldn't have existed in the first place. It completely continues the story on. It really brings forward Ryan Gosling as a brilliant actor, especially following from La La Land, which sadly couldn't be on this list as per the rules that we set down by ourselves.
Yeah.
But I know George would have put it on the worst, and I don't know if me and Chris would have put it on the best or not, but definitely be on my best.
Movies this year though, but I did enjoy La La Land, but I just like the rivalry between you two between it.
But one thing that I really do take from this film is the breakout performance from Ana de Armas. She was incredible as Joy. Completely believable relationship with her and Ryan Gosling, and it's just they did what her did in the film, and we're going to be doing some interesting videos in the future heading up towards the Oscars season. And when we talk about what the best scene of the year might be, I think me and Chris might have very similar choices as to what our favorite scene of the year is, coming from Blade Runner 2049 involving the character of Joy.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just Blade Runner 2049 shouldn't have existed, but I'm glad it does.
And I guess this brings me on to my very exhaustive list of honorable mentions for best of, and my number 1 for honorable mention.
Chris, what about George's number 2?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's because we've messed up the order. Yeah, my bad.
My number 2 pick is none other than Rian Johnson's Star Wars: The Last Jedi. I guess the big shock is that I didn't put a Star Wars film first for a change.
Does this show a diminishing quality in the Star Wars saga?
No, because number 1 was that good. The Last Jedi, I'm just going to say, it's not what I thought it would be. And part of the reason for that is why this film was so good, because no one thought it would go like this. I almost spoiled a major thing. I'm not going... I mean, like, everyone's probably seen it by now, but I'm still not going to spoil it just in case that one human being decided to skip it. This elevated the franchise to a new place, and yes, there's been a bit of instant outcry. The box office figures shutting them up. The haters are being shut up. Audience scores, not just Rotten Tomatoes, but Cinema Score, where they get their proper stats. That's been well. Do not let a Rotten Tomatoes fan score change your opinion. Yes, there are things which have been controversial, and you know what? There are things I don't like. There are many things I love. But one of my favorite parts about this film is the conversations coming from the film. How the fan base is talking with one another, and I respect all opinions as long as they're not crying about their 30-year-old fan theories being wrong. But The Last Jedi, to me, you had easily one of John Williams' best Star Wars scores. I thought it was absolutely outstanding listening to it on repeat. But that's been great. Adam Driver's performance as Kylo Ren, yes, he's become the meme as well. It's like 2 in 1. It's a double header of glory. It took the character of Kylo and elevated him further. Luke Skywalker, very different to what I expected, but I love the performance from Mark Hamill. It was obviously Carrie Fisher's final film, which is sad to see. He's got that obviously that one listing that not many people like, but I just thoroughly enjoyed what this film did. It was a Star Wars film. I was able to sit back and relax, but any film that can make me clap and cry several times in one viewing is a film that's doing stuff that I haven't really seen before. And I just liked the ambition that this film showed. There are faults, I will say that. I will go on record to that. And it's very hard to talk about this film in like a minute or two max.
Yeah.
But if you haven't seen it, which I assume everyone has, you have to go and see it like ASAP. It's a film where repeat viewings have helped a lot of people. I know someone that's liked it and he's seen it 3 times now and he's loved it. That was Dave who was in our review, wasn't it? Yeah, he was in our review. A spoiler-free one.
Yeah.
But The Last Jedi, it's to me to elevate the saga. It's done new things, and it's setting up Episode 9 to be very, very interesting. There's almost a clean slate for JJ to work off, except obviously Kylo versus Rey, First Order versus Resistance. But this is a film that I think just has to be seen out of curiosity. But I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was a slow burner, maybe slightly too long, but what we saw was wonderful. And I visited Skellig Michael, which I remind everybody every time I talk about this film. We've got the little Lego set, and I also stole a piece of Luke's real hut.
Oh, wait, what? Did you?
Yeah, I stole that. I've got like 4 of them.
Oh, Disney are going to be coming after you now, George.
Coming after me now. It's a historical land site. I can actually get done for that, but I just broadcast on YouTube for the sake of it.
So I think you had a lot better weather when you went than I did.
Yes.
It was an absolute hellish. It looked like that scene where Luke Skywalker was catching the giant fish. Really
and mine was the scene where she hands the lightsaber over in broad sunlight.
Yeah, I think I drew the short straw with that trip, I think.
But no, I will say Last Jedi, I absolutely loved it, and it's done stuff I didn't think it would do. And it has my favourite moment, maybe one of the best moments in Star Wars history, and probably my favourite scene in the cinema this year.
Right now it's my honorable mentions, isn't it?
Yes.
I'm gonna get the order right on this. So the first honorable mention that I'm going to talk about is one that I really, really regret that I couldn't put on my list. It would have probably been like a joint number 5 or 4. Baby Driver. It's already been talked about on the list, but I've never really liked. Oh God, I forgot his name. What's the director's name?
Edgar Wright.
Edgar Wright. I've never really liked his movies. Never gravitated towards like Scott Pilgrim, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz. Like it had the moments, but never one that really cemented me. This movie I absolutely loved. The editing. Unfortunately, there's now a cast member in there that makes it very incredibly awkward to watch in some scenes. Absolutely love Baby Driver. I had T2 Trainspotting on there, a film that kind of went under radar for a lot of people. Sequel to obviously the 90s movie Trainspotting. Didn't need a sequel, but it was a very fitting one. It was nice to see these characters come back and where they are in their lives now. I had Power Rangers on there. I thought it was a great modern retelling of Power Rangers. Do love me some Power Rangers. Even though the whole Krispy Kreme product placement did get a little bit over the top. Had Wonder Woman on there, absolutely loved it, with hands down the best DC film in the recent few years with this new cinematic franchise. Had The Fate of the Furious, very, very enjoyable action movie, kind of a throwback in the style of like old 80s action movies that I loved. Had Logan on there, and Jigsaw. Now, Jigsaw wasn't inherently a good movie, but it was nice to finally get to see a Saw movie in the cinema, so I threw that on there as well. So they're all my honorable mentions.
My honorable mentions, we have the romantic, but not really romantic comedy, The Big Sick, which was only just edged off the list by Baby Driver. There was another film which was vying for that final position as well, which I'll be talking about in a minute. The Big Sick would highly recommend. It's about a comedian and a relationship that spans over a coma, and it's a really kind of heartwarming and at the same time brutal tale of dedication and like I'd say dealing with loss, and that doesn't spoil anything by saying that because it's not the kind of loss that you would expect. Disaster Artist, a phenomenal performance by James Franco to play Tommy Wiseau for The Room. It just was a very fun film. You could see that they were enjoying themselves on set, and I really do hope that it gets nominated for some form of Oscar, just so that Tommy Wiseau can go to the Oscars, because that would be kind of bringing The Room full circle. The other film that was vying for that Baby Driver spot, by the way, was The Death of Stalin.
Still haven't got to see it.
That's the one film this year I need to watch, is that, because it kind of got shafted on its release around here.
It's just so funny. They take a concept of the passing of Stalin and the passing of power into almost like a old school SNL sketch, elongated out, and it has some elements of British comedy in there. I have to say Jason Isaacs' character has probably one of the funniest lines I've heard throughout the entire year, which just had everyone in the cinema in stitches. It's not a out and out comedy. It's a very British, I would say, comedy. The humor is very witty. To be honest, it feels a bit like Monty Python, somewhere between SNL and Monty Python. So I really enjoyed that. And my final one is Get Out, which was another horror film this year.
Rewatched that recently, actually.
Yeah,
Watched it for the
really,
first time.
really
Yeah.
good directional debut from Jordan Peele. I quite enjoyed the film. I thought it was very good. So yeah.
Before I do my mentions, I want to say about Death of Stalin. Anybody that liked it or wants to see it, do go and watch The Thick of It. The creator Armando Iannucci, that was his British politics series, one of the funniest series ever made. For those that like their satire, it was Peter Capaldi. That's how he really got famous as Malcolm Tucker. And that is why I can also not watch him as Doctor Who, even though I've tried many times. He would always be Malcolm Tucker. Please watch that. It's absolutely amazing. And they did a film called In the Loop, which I think was actually quite a big hit in America. And he was the only cast member to keep his character name. But yeah, my honorable mentions. I'm not going to go into detail on them all because two of them we spoke about. Logan, Baby Driver, just missed out. Then you've got John Wick 2, which was amazing. Keanu is king. I cannot wait for John Wick 3 again. As a film we didn't need, it was actually amazing. And I also want to add on Logan Lucky. I saw it very recently. Very funny, very unique, different to not what I thought it would be, but a different style of comedy, mainly about simple-minded people. But I had a blast watching that film. I thought it was great fun. And it's always nice to see a sort of heisty film, unlike Ocean's 8, which looks like shite.
Is that it? Oh, sorry, you got more?
I can mention some more, but I just don't want to spam it.
Okay.
Right, I guess this brings me on to my number one then, and it's a movie that George has literally just mentioned, and indeed Brinsley in the comments has just mentioned. My number one pick is John Wick Chapter 2. I'm absolutely astounded that this is my number one, and I'm going to rule it out there. It's not the best made movie out there compared to some of the other ones on the list, or indeed some of the other ones that have been listed in the honorable mentions, but this is without a doubt my most enjoyable film from this year. With action movies, especially modern day action movies, you get to the point where you kind of think you've seen everything. Like nothing can wow you anymore in the action genre. Everything's paint by the numbers until The Raid, and The Raid 2 came out, and then that kind of set the standard and you think it can't be beat. And I don't even know if it has been beat, but it's been equal in my opinion.
It hasn't.
I don't know if it's been beaten, but it's been equal.
It's been equaled.
Yeah.
I would agree.
With John Wick Chapter 2. I love the first John Wick film. Very, very simple film, very simple premise, and I can understand why some people would prefer that one if they preferred that simpler plot to it. This one enhanced the world of John Wick, and now John Wick 3 might be one of the most anticipated sequels I've ever known. John Wick 2 ended, not going to give away the ending, and it's made me, like, as soon as it finished, I was like, I could do a John Wick 3 right now. I've got another 2 years to wait. Keanu Reeves is fantastic. He's one of the most endearing actors working in the business today. Really humble guy, really, really nice. Does most of his own stunts in this film as well. I don't know if he does all of them, but he definitely does a lot. And by God, the action, it's ramped up, but it's ramped up in a like unobtrusive way. There's some great set pieces in this film, like when they go to Rome, there's like this disco going with the dance floor. You're getting like to the catacombs of Rome. This whole subplot of him having to like fulfill a marker, fulfill a debt of an old colleague who worked at the Continental with him. You get some great side characters as well. And it's just an all-round enjoyable experience. It's a film I've watched about 4 or 5 times since it came out, and it never gets old. It was really loud at the cinema as well. I think Dunkirk beat it in terms of volume, but this movie, by God, absolutely loved it. One of my favorite action movies ever made now. I would definitely put this in my top 10 of best action films, and roll on John Wick 3. It's a film that was way better than it had any right to be. And yeah, absolutely loved it. Number one pick.
We can assume what George's number one is going to be pretty easy. So as far as variety is concerned, we will have an action-based film, we will have a war-based film, and I'm going to pick something slightly different. My number one pick, I only watched a few days ago, and it's been impossible trying to not speak about it to literally everyone I've talked to. I've never actually seen a film where they've taken the literal kind of translation of every frame being a painting except for Loving Vincent. And Loving Vincent is one of the most beautiful films I have ever seen. Literally every single frame looks like it could go in a museum. And to go along with it is a very compelling story about a person who didn't really know Vincent van Gogh, but his father did, and he's going off and trying to find out what happened in his death, on the will of his father. He's forced into this situation, and you slowly see him getting more involved with the kind of figuring out what happens in the lead up to the events of his suicide. And it would be a stunning film in itself if it wasn't rotoscoped to look like an oil painting. But the film itself, in that format that it's done, every flashback scene is done in black and white, almost like hand sketched, and every single normal scene is done to look like a perfect Van Gogh painting. It had over 500 artists working on it for over somewhere between 10 to 15 years, and all of that was worth it. It would be a crime if it didn't win Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. It'd be a crime if it wasn't up and won Best Cinematography. I think the only thing that can compete with it is either Dunkirk or Blade Runner on cinematography wise. But this film needs to be praised for as much as it can, because it is probably the most beautiful film I've ever seen in every aspect that it does.
And I haven't seen it yet, but I'll try and get to a screening or sometime of that.
Chris, does that not make you want to watch the film?
I didn't know it was going to be your number one, but I guess I should have been expecting it when you said you were going to talk about it. But we will be on a review for that sometime this week. We're going to try and find a time when we can both get a review out for that. But you sent me the trailer for that, kind of like Kubo, where it's a film that I'd never even heard of, and you just sort of under the radar sent me this trailer. And it's one that I definitely do need to get watched. It will get watched, and we'll have a review this week.
That's two animated films in a row. It's like George's Star Wars.
Yeah. But not this year.
Not this year.
Which leads me into my number one film of 2017. You guessed it, Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. A couple of bits of background information. Yes, he's my favorite director of all time. Yes, Hans Zimmer is my favorite composer of all time. But something which I think I've spoke about definitely to you guys away from the camera, but I don't know on camera, that I wouldn't say I'm a history nut, but I loved my modern history when I was at school, especially the sort of the 1900s. So when you see all these films come out of the cinema, it's always, Fury, a film about us American guys in World War II. Saving Private Ryan, which was the greatest war film of all time, that rightfully so was an incredible piece of cinema by the first 20 minutes. When you get Dunkirk, and I remember when they announced this, I remember hearing on the news well over 2 years ago now, an A-list director is scouting Dunkirk Beach to make a Dunkirk film. For those that didn't at the time, was obviously, well, now you know, because the film, the evacuation, where basically we got absolutely annihilated at the first part of World War II. I'm not going to go into the history details because you've seen the film. But when they announced this was going to be a film, I was like, okay, I'm digging this. If it's got the right budget, the right people, I'm down. And then it dropped like a pancake. Christopher Nolan's directing it. I was sold from day one. Then the cast started coming on board. Kenneth Branagh, Tom Hardy, Cillian Murphy, unknowns, Harry Styles.
Mark Rylance, the one you always forget.
I was going to try and talk quite about Harry Styles, who actually ended up being good. You know, that was my issue coming into this film, was him and having teenage girls screaming in every scene, and there was neither. He was good, and they went there.
There was an audible gasp across the audience when Harry Styles first came on screen.
Not on mine, but I think that's because I watched it at 12 o'clock when it was probably school time. But anyway, getting to the actual film itself, this is my film of the year purely because it combines my favorite director making something that hasn't really been done on the big screen. There's this film in the 60s on Dunkirk, but then it happened. And I mean, let's be honest, Nolan can't make a simple film. He wants to push the boundaries. He wants to add more to it. And the multi-narrative was, to me, one of the biggest risks because, like everyone else, I thought we were getting a 3-hour extravaganza in the war. Like, because he does long films. And then when they announced it's going to be 1 hour 45, we were all like, what?
We were in denial, weren't we? I remember.
Yeah, I refused.
It's not confirmed. Like,
I refused to believe it. And then I witnessed it. I witnessed it. I went down to London, the IMAX, where obviously we watched Last Jedi, Leicester Square. I was not disappointed. This was, to me, the greatest cinematic experience of my life. I've seen it now 4 times at the big screen. Each IMAX. 4th one was literally like a week before the Blu-ray came out. I watched it because they had it in 70mm at the BFI in London, which was also amazing. And obviously I've got it on 4K and everything like that. It's not just spectacle. I think with this film, that if you look at the prospect of it, that he wants every character. He doesn't want backstories. He wants every person to be seen as a British soldier at the time, and everybody's got the same goal to get home. Doesn't matter what they're doing, whether it's the Scottish people or Country Club man. He wants to get home. They'll do it their way. You got the French soldier. Spoiler. He's French, not German. He wants to get home and he dies. George, who wants to be useful, dies. It's so hard to talk about it in so little time. I could talk about this film longer than the actual film's runtime. That's how much I love this film. But the one thing I will say very briefly is the cinematography by Hoyt van Hoyme is absolutely beautiful. Whether that's the sort of the shots on the boat, literally the Spitfires in the air, they strapped. I cannot stress how much I should say to buy the Blu-ray to watch the 2-hour special features. Even my dad watched it. I know that's not really much of an opinion, but for a man to watch that on Christmas Day alongside my mum and one of my sisters, that was something else. And they did all want to watch it. That's the irony. Seeing them strap a camera, it's like the greatest plane ever made, was something. Tom Hardy actually was in a Spitfire. They redesigned a 2-seater Spitfire just so that could be at the front because it's a Christopher Nolan film. It can't be simple, can it? Didn't want Cedar, didn't want that, but it's so hard to like not go on about like trying tidbits of this. But I will say that the cinematography was beautiful. The performances were great. As an ensemble cast, I think everybody got a chance to shine. I can't give you the best performances. Some unknowns who I do hope go on to do stuff because they look like they have potential. The soundtrack by Hans Zimmer, my words. I know Chris isn't the biggest fan of it, but
it fits the movie. But it's just in terms of musicality to me, it's not like a sit down and listen to soundtrack.
You say that, but when you walk home from work in the fog, and then you know you're in. This is going to sweep the Oscars. I've said this before. The Oscars love war films. I don't count the BAFTAs because it's going to be biased to Dunkirk because it's British and it's about the British, obviously, stuff. But this is going to sweep. This is Nolan's year. This was his film. To me, this is, I mean, Spielberg, he's a one in a million. He's got Schindler's List. He's got Jurassic Park. He's got Saving Private Ryan. This is going to be Nolan's one. This is the one where he will take it. I don't know. What else can I say about it? I want your thoughts. I know Tate's not the biggest fan, and people make the opinion I would say it is a lot more than spectacle. I've seen it at home. Spectacle. It's not spectacle, this story. It's telling me the evacuation of Dunkirk.
I'm going to defer to Tate on this one because I've already talked about this movie, and I know Tate has a lot to say on this, which might not be in accordance with what you've said.
This film falls into the gravity trap.
It's got a story. Gravity doesn't.
The film in 2013, Gravity. I'd say that this film does have more of a story, but the story still isn't strong enough. It's all about the spectacle. It's all about going to see it on the biggest screen possible. Seeing it on a scaled down screen takes away from the experience. And because of that, it just kind of downgrades the film. I feel like also the whole switching up of the times in the films, the whole different areas like land, sea, air, and different times, that didn't come across as clean as it could have. It was a nice twist to have the first time you watch it, but like after that, it just becomes, well, why didn't they just do the film normal? Why did there have to be that kind of twist? It detracts completely from what it could have been if that was taken out of the film. He tried to overcomplicate things. He tried to make it more than it needed to be. And it could have been, it probably would have made my list if it didn't have that time switching and if it had a little bit more of a compelling story where you can get involved with the characters. But in the end, it's a good film. I can say that. I respect the filmmaking behind it, but it just doesn't sit well with me because its rewatchability value is lowered.
I would say after 6 viewings, I don't feel like that.
But how many times of those did you rewatch it in a cinema?
4. I've seen it twice at home.
Okay.
What I will say, Brinsley in the comments, damn, comparing Dunkirk to Gravity is harsh. I think with this, there's other things to take into account because I do like the history of it. There's a natural bias there because I'm British, of course. There's a further bias there. But to me, this film was the one. I didn't think the film would be like this, but I take it for what it is. But I would like to disagree completely on the timescale. I think if we had a week of Tom Hardy refueling a plane, going on shooting Germans, it'd be incredibly boring.
No, but you don't need that. You have the different areas of the film which are separate, and I feel like Chris said it earlier. As soon as someone is able to edit in the actual timeline of the film and do it properly, I would watch that, and I'd probably enjoy it a lot more than having the jumbled up timeline that we saw.
I would say it would be a lot more boring.
I've watched the movie now about, I think, like 3 or 4 times. And every time I watch it with like that editor's mind, like thinking like, would I be able to reorder this? And I'm still trying to get my head around all the different structure of it. I think it's going to take a good few more viewings before it all gets cemented.
It's what I will say is a final thing though, for the Dunkirk evacuation, because there was so much focus on the boats, on the beach, and in the air. That's why I think for him to pick the 3 was the ballsiest thing he did. Nolan does this in an interview before that he had the choice to make this several times before, basically after Dark Knight and after Rises, but he delayed it until he thought he was competent enough to do it. I will give him credit for that. I'm not going to go into details on watch every 2 hour, this is what happened, but it's truly worth watching. I know there's a lot of spectacle involved, but just to see the amount of detail that this guy does when he puts over 1,000 extras on a beach, when they're burning 1,000 costumes to make it look like they've already been in war for 6 months, it's truly worth watching. But as a film, this is my standout of the last year, and I will say it's harder for us because we've seen it at the cinema. But I think people watching at home, they will still be as tense on the first viewing as we were at that cinema.
And
but that's my final thing. Give him the Oscar.
Watch it on full volume as well.
Yes, if you're ever home alone, put it up more. Like I'm lucky, I've got the middle floor at my house. And when I was testing, like one of my friends come over, I was showing him like the 4K stuff because I got all the Nolan films upgraded last week. The scene when they're dropping the bombs over the beach, like the second one on the pier, where what's his name, Lockhart starts running away. The sound just fucking shook the house. It was like being back at the cinema. I will give them the credit, but for the authenticity and getting history rights was amazing. Not to get geeky with history stuff, but it's fucking shit when you see historically accurate films completely inaccurate.
Yeah.
And this, I mean, he strapped an IMAX camera to a $2 million plane and drove it into the ocean. That's all I can finally say.
And we're all interested to know what his next movie is going to be. I get that with every Christopher Nolan movie. When one ends, I'm waiting for the next one in 2 or 3 years' time, whenever it's going to be.
What's more amazing is that he's always had, like he said, this is a passion project from 20 years ago. Interstellar was his brother's script. Inception he did across 8 years as a screenplay. You just know he's got something, but I would like to see him do a psychological thriller. I mean, Prestige is a thriller. I wouldn't say it's psychological, but it goes into psychology of the characters. But
yeah.
I would like to see something else like that because, I mean, he's
What
good.
about psychological horror?
If he can make his version of The Shining, then go for it. I don't like horror films, so please don't make it too much. But I have a feeling that if he wanted to do a House of Mirrors, he'd probably like murder somebody, like stone up disgracefully and bluntly. But I just can't wait to see what he does next.
Same here. And you talked about that you'd like to talk about Dunkirk more. And last year we did actually discuss a potential series for the channel, which sadly never came to fruition in 2017. But I'm sure it's one that we'll probably look back into.
Heading into Oscar season.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So we have got still a lot of ideas. And now that 2018's here, we've all had an action plan, and we're going to ramp up the channel even more, especially as we're getting towards the Oscars. So that'll do it for our video tonight for our best and worst films of 2017. We can wave a fond farewell now to 2017, and we can look to 2018 and all the host of Oscar movies that we've got coming out in the next couple of months for us in the UK. So look out for reviews of those. I know it's a good while off yet, but we'll have dates for our Oscars live stream when that eventually comes. That's still a good few months off yet. But yeah, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. In the description down below, there's a bunch of social media links. We've got Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're going to be bringing more content to that now. And yeah, so if you like movies, this is the channel to be, I guess. Thank you to everyone that's been on the stream tonight. Lucas McManus and Brinsley, always on the channel. Great to get the comments going on that. And yeah,
can you repeat their comments that fuck the fanboys and / DC fans?
Yes, yeah. That's our one last middle finger to the DC fanboys before moving into 2018.
2017 can celebrate the end of the DCEU. And with that, we can say thank you for listening. And we will be back to normal this week. We've got the news, I think, on Thursday, which I can't wait to talk about. But
see you guys later.
See you guys.